A year and a half has passed since the end of the war. In the rebuilt and prosperous Alexandria, Rick, now with shorter and grayer hair, enjoys watching Michonne paint with Judith. They go outside the walls to look at a flock of birds in a field. In the shelter, a yard filled with walkers has been replaced with crops. Rosita helps Eugene with the experiment, and Laura reports something to Daryl, who is now in charge. He goes into the yard and notices that Arat and Justin are trying to use walkers as scarecrows, as they did before, under the pretext of scaring crows, but Daryl stops it. On the way, Tara is scouting when Eugene informs her over the radio that Daryl will meet with the rest of the group so they can go to Washington in search of agricultural materials. Elsewhere, Jesus and Aaron kill several walkers. Aaron asks Jesus if he can teach him some of his skills, to which he agrees to teach him in a classroom at the hilltop. Some time later, Daryl goes to meet Rick, Michonne, Carol, Maggie and the others in downtown Washington. Rick and the group infiltrate the Smithsonian Institution in search of a covered wagon and agricultural equipment. Walking across the fragile glass floor, they notice walkers under it. Suddenly, a walker falls on him from the balcony, breaking the glass, and Daryl manages to lay him down. Rick tells everyone to be careful, and the group breaks up. In the basement, Siddiq is attacked by a walker whose head is full of spiders. He barely manages to kill him, and he confesses to Rick that he is more afraid of spiders, which Annette laughs at. In the hallway, Gabriel punches a walking man's head with a machete and leaves it hanging on the showcase of human evolution. They smile at the irony of this act. At the stairs, Cindy sees an old canoe and remembers an incident that happened to her brother. Daryl turns to her, and the two of them lift the canoe. Returning to the basement, the survivor finds bags of seeds and beans. Rick thanks Anne for the tip, and she tells Gabriel that she knew about it because she brought her class once when she was teaching. Returning to the stairs, Maggie tells Michonne and Carol that Gregory called the Hilltop election and lost, making Maggie the rightful leader. Michonne stops and looks at an exhibition about politics and how to unite different colonies. Soon after, the whole group reunites and, with the help of ropes, carefully lowers the old covered wagon down the stairs and glass floor. Finally, the glass is given, and Ezekiel falls through it, dangling on a rope. Before the walkers can bite him, Daryl shoots one of them, and Rick and the others finally pull him to safety. Carol happily kisses him in honor of this. The group is leaving DC and preparing to return to the communities. On the way, Alden talks to Kenneth and Mark about blacksmithing at the hilltop. In the background, Ezekiel proposes to Carol. She tells him to put the ring away and reminds him that she doesn't want to be proposed to, especially on a horse. And tongues or smiles and tells her he still loves her. Rosita and Daryl catch up with everyone to inform them that the main bridge is not working due to the fact that a herd has piled on it. Rick tells Tara, Gabriel, Aaron and Anna to return to Alexandria, and the others will go the other way and spend the night in the shelter. In the forest, the cart gets stuck in the mud when walkers appear from the bushes. In the end, she refuses to budge and everyone rushes to collect supplies until the walkers overpower them and they are forced to leave. Ken runs back to free his horses, but he is bitten on the arm by a walker, and then the horse hits him in the ribs. Siddiq and Neat try to save him, but Ken loses blood and dies from his wounds. A saddened Maggie sobs beside him before putting him to sleep. At night, at the Hilton, Maggie breaks the news of Ken's death to his parents Tammy and Earl. An emotional Tammy scolds Maggie for killing her son because of her, reminding her that she voted for her in the election. Earl tries to calm her down, but Tammy doesn't listen and criticizes Maggie's decision to supply the saviors. Shocked, Maggie offers to help with the funeral, but Tammy refuses. Later, Hilltop residents gather for Ken's funeral. Alden sings, Gregory gives a eulogy. Maggie holds her son Herschel in her arms and watches from the balcony. Rick stays in the shelter with a group to deliver supplies. Michonne draws attention to the graffiti with the inscription "We are still a Nigan," and Daryl demands Justin to remove it. Rick promises the rescuers that he will continue to support them so that they can get back on their feet. Everyone applauds him and treats him like a celebrity. Daryl takes Rick aside to tell him that he doesn't want to run this place anymore. He suggests that he return to Hilltop to check on Maggie and Herschel, but Rick objects that he should return to Alexandria. Everything has changed, Rick says, but Daryl claims it's because Rick changed them, and leaves. Outside, Carol follows Daryl and offers him to take over the running of the shelter. She tells him about Zeke's offer and says she wants to take her time. Daryl is surprised and asks if he should stay with her. She refuses and puts her head on his shoulder. In the trailer, Tammy is mourning her son, and Gregory got Earl drunk and suggested that Maggie should no longer be a leader. At the shelter, Rick and Michonne go to bed, and Michonne asks if they did the right thing by leaving Negan alive. Rick, however, stands by his opinion. Then she suggests creating a charter between communities, defining rules and punishments. Rick agrees and tells her how lucky he is to have found her. They kiss and make love. Back at Hilltop, Maggie takes Herschel out for a walk and runs into Gregory, who informs her that someone may have desecrated Glenn's grave. Upset, she rushes to the grave and is attacked by a hooded stranger, who also overturns Herschel's stroller. Annette intervenes, but she is pushed hard to the ground and loses consciousness. Alden and Cindy grab the attacker, and Maggie rips off his hood to reveal a drunken Earl. Maggie rushes to Gregory and accuses him of trying to kill her. He angrily reminds her that he built this place and tries to stab her, but she overpowers him and puts the legs of his neck. The next day, Carol tells Ezekiel that she will stay at the shelter, and instructs Jerry to take care of him while they hit the road. Daryl, Michonne and Rick stay at Hilltop and find workers building gallows there. Later, Rick asks Maggie to visit Alexandria, but she says she can't because Negan is there. He asks her for help in repairing the bridge, which includes delivering supplies to the shelter. She says she will only agree if the rescuers agree to provide labor and fuel. At night, residents gather around the gallows, and Maggie explains to her people that the punishment corresponds to the crime. She looks at Gregory, who has a noose around his neck and is sitting on a horse. Gregory begs someone to stop it, but no one moves. A couple of kids show up and Michonne yells at Maggie to stop, but it's too late as Daryl slaps the horse and she drives off, leaving Gregory hanging to his death, to everyone's shock. Maggie tells her people she wants this to be the last time they do something like this. Shocked, Rick and Michonne watch as Maggie orders Daryl to cut the noose. In Alexandria, Rick goes down to the basement to talk to someone. He mentions that 35 days have passed since the construction of the bridge between the communities began. He talks about how things have changed since the war and how communities are working together to repair a bridge that will become a link to their future. "We're starting a new life," Rick says, in the camp that the communities have set up in the forest, and explains to Henry how important the bridge is for connecting communities. Carol hands Henry his stick, kisses him goodbye, and tells Eichel that she is going to stay in the shelter. Rick, along with Eugene and Rosita, plans an explosion that should distract the oncoming herd. Nearby, Siddiq watches as Neat puts stitches on Cindy's arm. Rick orders Siddiq to return home with the next team and says about Nit that he is confident in her. At the hilltop, Maggie gets on a horse when Michonne arrives. She tells Maggie that the planned food supply has not arrived at the shelter, but Maggie claims that the fuel has not arrived either. Jesus confirms that they have a surplus of food, but Maggie objects that without a working plow, it won't last long. Michonne offers to let Earl out so he can fix it, but Maggie scoffs and says she doesn't mind waiting for the fuel to show up at the shelter. On the bridge, Aaron shares with Daryl his experience of fatherhood with Gracie and tells him that one day he will be a great father. Meanwhile, Henry stays to distribute water to the workers. Justin pushes him away for not giving him extra water and starts drinking from the jug. Henry gets angry and beats him down with his stick. Jed laughs and mocks Justin. Furious, Justin gets up to take revenge, but Daryl stops him, saying that the guy is just doing his job. Justin swings at him, but Daryl dodges the blow and hits him in the face. Justin throws sand in Daryl's face and they start fighting. Rick arrives and stops them. He tells everyone to get back to work. He takes Daryl to his tent to calm him down, reminding him that they need the help of the saviors in building the bridge, despite several deserters. However, Daryl says the saviors won't obey just because he said so. Rick explains that he wants everyone to be on the same side, and Daryl asks if this is really the case, and leaves. Carol advises Rick to talk to him when he calms down. Back at Hilltop, Tammy begs Jesus to see Earl, but he says the time hasn't come yet, reminding her that he tried to kill Maggie. Tammy grabs a stool and says she won't budge until Maggie lets her see him. Michonne overhears and tells Jesus to think about talking to Maggie about it, but he replies that it's none of her business. She disagrees and says they need to build something bigger. At the camp, Anna paints a picture for Gabriel and complains that no one trusts her except him and Rick. Gabriel tells her that at first no one trusted him either, until Rick made it possible. She pats his hand and thanks him for staying by her side. At the hilltop, Maggie plays with Herschel while Jesus tells her that they should consider introducing official rules to resolve situations like Earl, Negan, and Gregory. In the end, she agrees. After the conversation, Tammy is allowed to see her husband. She talks to him about his mistakes and forgives him. Maggie listens and worries a little. Later, she talks to Earl herself. He mentions how he became an alcoholic, and does not remember the first time he saw his son. In the Rosita Forest, I am glad to detonate explosives to lure a horde of walkers in another direction, away from the camp. Elsewhere, Tara sits on a crane and communicates by radio with Rick to inform him of a plan to distract walkers, and then by radio with Jerry to activate a hand-turned siren. Alden arrives to inform Rick that none of the defected rescuers will return to the shelter, and their families are worried. Tara contacts Rick Parade again to warn him that the second siren has failed and the herd is approaching. Suddenly, walkers come to the place and a commotion begins. Jet panics and lets go of the rope, allowing the huge log to pin Aaron to the ground. Daryl shouts to the team to lift the log, and he stabs the walkers around him twice with a knife. They lift the log, but Aaron's arm is crushed. Daryl carries Aaron to the camp while Rick and the others restrain the walkers. Rick shoots the rope holding the pile of logs, and an avalanche of logs falls on the remaining walkers. Daryl takes Aaron to the infirmary, and Nit quickly makes a decision about the need for amputation. Aaron reluctantly agrees while Daryl ties the tourniquet. And Nit amputates his arm with a bone saw. In anger, Daryl goes to find out from Justin why the second siren was not turned on. Justin claims that the walkie-talkie was not loaded, and Daryl attacks him, strikes him several times. Carol begs him to stop, and the rest of the camp is watching. Back at Hilltop, Maggie tells Michonne that she is open to making common laws. She explains that her father, like Earl, drank and also deserved a second chance, but Gregory got several chances and did not change. At camp, at night, Rick tells Justin to get his stuff and leave, and if he sees him again, a couple of stitches won't fix what he'll do to him. Then he goes to Janet and says she did a good job with Aaron. Rick apologizes to Aaron for what happened. Aaron says he couldn't have known, and declares that thanks to Rick, it's no longer the end of the world, it's the beginning of a whole new one. Nearby, Anna asks Gabriel who the woman she painted for him was, and he replies that it was his organist, whom he loved and lost. She asks him if he is still afraid, but is interrupted when he kisses her. They smile and start kissing until Gabriel remembers that he should be on watch. Anna replies that then he can watch, and begins to unbutton his trousers. At the camp, while everyone is laughing and talking, Carol asks for tongues or a ring. He is excited and is about to give a speech, but she tells him that he can give her a speech later. She puts on the ring and they hug and smile. Vic happily watches them from his tent. Back in Alexandria, Rick finishes telling his story to the locked-up Negan. Negan teases him with Carl, but an angry Rick silences him. He says he should keep quiet and listen, but Negan says, "You're not saving this world, Rick, you're just cooking it for me." At the guard post, and notices a helicopter from a crane and gets nervous. In the woods, Justin hears something and sees someone he recognizes. He asks what they are doing here, but he is abruptly pulled aside. In the field, a group of walkers devour Justin's body. The walker walks away when he comes to life and walks past a building labeled Last Warnings. The next morning, Rick wakes up and kisses Michonne. Going down the stairs, he touches Carl's handprint, cut from the boards of the porch floor and now fixed on the wall. Then he walks around Alexandria. Later, he returns to his house and thanks Michonne for being wonderful and for everything she does. He suggests they find other ways to build a future, implying the birth of a child. Michonne kisses him and they make love. On the way, Maggie and Cal are taking food to the shelter when they are stopped by a small group of rescuers who ask her about missing people. Jack steals a tomato from the trunk and takes a big bite. Maggie says that she will remember him for this, and the other rescuers miss her. Suddenly they notice a zombie Justin stumbling on the road. Back in Alexandria, Rick and Michonne spend a family day with Judith, playing, having a picnic and reading fairy tales. Suddenly, Cattle runs up and informs them that Maggie found Justin in the form of a walker, but it doesn't look like an accident. At the camp, the saviors are furious at the news of Justin's death. Alden promises that they will get to the truth, but Jed slaps him in the face, declaring that he is no longer one of them. Carol intervenes with a gun at her hip and stops Jed. The rescuers begin to accuse Daryl and of being guilty. They grab their axes to strike back when Rick drives into the center of the group with a gun at the ready and warns everyone to retreat. Arat and Laura help neutralize the saviors. After they split up, Rick asks Gabriel where Anna was last night when Justin disappeared. Gay vouches for her, but Rick orders him to keep an eye on her. Alden asks Rick if some of the saviors can get guns, but Rick replies that they need to find out what happened first. Maggie asks Rick who he thinks killed Justin, and he looks at Daryl. In the tent, Gabrielle tells Anne about Rick's suspicion and asks if she knows anything about Justin's disappearance, but she denies it and asks him if he thinks she's hiding something before leaving. Meanwhile, Rick asks Daryl about Justin, suggesting that he could have been shot with an arrow or bolt. "If I was going to kill him, I'd do it in front of everyone," he counters, before saying that the saviors don't deserve to start a new life, while their dead friends didn't get the chance. Rick ends the conversation by asking Daryl to try, reminding him that he once spared the man who left his brother to die on the roof. Daryl remains in thought. In the woods, Maggie and Cindy head to an abandoned house with a noisy roof that has attracted a small group of walkers. Maggie distracts them while Cindy investigates. Another group of walkers breaks out of the broken front door, and Maggie runs there to kill them. Cindy was almost bitten until Rick, Daryl and Rosita rescued her. They check Beatrice on the radio, but do not get an answer, so they try to find her and find her unconscious in the woods. When she comes to, she tells them that she was attacked from behind and that Arad is missing. Later, at the camp, Rick asks his team to find Arada before the rescuers find out and leave, delaying the construction of the bridge. In the woods, Rick and Carol are looking for Tarada. He says that he is constantly tempted to kill Nigan, but stops himself, reminding himself that you need to build a life, not take it away. Elsewhere, Maggie confesses to Daryl that what Rick is doing is right for the future. They find a walker with a bolt in his body, and Daryl says, "I know who took Rad." At night, she returns to the dump and finds a hidden walkie-talkie. She communicates by radio with an unknown man from the helicopter. He asks her if she has a or B, she asks for a $5 and declares that she has paid her dues, but the man says that in order for their deal to take place, she needs a $5, and she promises them it tomorrow. Suddenly, Gabrielle appears behind her and asks who she was talking to and if she has anything to do with Justin. And admits to trading people for goods, and she was planning to trade Gabe and Rick when she kidnapped them. She asks him to go with her to a new place that is much better and far away, but he should not tell anyone anything. Gabe says he has to tell Rick, but she replies, "All this time I thought you were a 4, after which she knocks him out with her walkie-talkie. Back in the woods, Jet and DJ ambush Carol and Rick. He put a knife to Carol's neck, and Rick pointed a gun at his head. Jet explains to Rick that it's about returning their weapons for protection before leaving. Carol pulls a knife out of her sleeve, pretends to obey, and then plunges it into her shoulder, while Rick forces the DJ to kneel. Meanwhile, Daryl and Maggie stay in the Last Warning building and discover Cindy and a group from Oceanside, who is holding Erat on his knees for execution. Cindy emotionally tells that this is their former settlement, and remembers how Erat and the Saviors destroyed her people. Justin killed Beatrice's husband, and Rad killed Cindy's brother without mercy. Cindy says they obeyed Rick's rules because they thought they had to, until Maggie executed Gregory by showing them the way. From that moment on, they kill the Saviors responsible for the destruction of Oceanside. Erat starts crying, claiming that she had no choice, but Cindy reminds her how she smiled when she killed her brother. Erat begs Daryl and Maggie to help her, but they leave, and Cindy spears her in the back of the head. The next morning, the rescuers leave the camp. On the way, Maggie tells Daryl that they gave Rick's way a chance, but it's time to meet up with Negan. In Alexandria, Michonne spends her days doing various errands around the house, and at night goes to kill walkers in the woods. One night she finds a walker hanging from a tree, which shocks her. She bursts into tears. Another walker attacks her, but she kills him with a baseball bat. She looks at the bloody bat with horror, remembering Negan and his actions. At the hilltop, Maggie keeps Herschel and then gives him to the babysitter. Later, she grabs a backpack and secretly puts a crowbar in it, planning to go to Alexandria to deal with Negan. Jesus tries to convince her not to go, but she instructs him to look after the hilltop while she is away. At the camp, Eugene informs Rick about the state of the rising river in connection with the construction of the bridge. He apologizes for the bad news, but Rick reminds him how valuable he is to them, which makes him smile. Inside the main tent, Carol tells Rick that she is taking her people back to the kingdom while the asylum decides who they want to be. He accepts her decision with tears in his eyes and looks down with sadness. Jerry stays to warn Rick about Maggie's trip to Alexandria. He immediately radioed Rachel to warn his people not to let Maggie into the community, but Rachel picks up a magazine and ignores the request. Daryl overhears Rick and tells him that he will take him to Alexandria himself. In Alexandria, Nora tells Michonne that Negan refuses to eat and promises to deal with it. On the road, Daryl drives past a bend, and Rick angrily tells him to stop. Rick asks what he's doing, and Daryl reveals that he messed up the relay so Maggie would be allowed into Alexandria to kill Negan. Rick tries to use the walkie-talkie, but Daryl knocks it out of his hands, and they fight until they roll into a huge pit. Back in Alexandria, Michonne brings Negan food, and he says he will only eat if she stays to talk to him. She agrees to stay for an hour. In the pit, Rick and Daryl argue about whether to let Negan live. Daryl reminds Rick how Negan turned him into a slave and how no one agrees with him staying. Rick says that if they make Negan a martyr, then everyone who died during the war, including Carl, will die in vain. Daryl tells Rick that he is ready to die for him and for Carl too, but he has to let him go. In Alexandria, Negan tells Michonne that he shouldn't be in a cell, just like she shouldn't be doing casual chores and looking after children. Michonne replies that she is helping to restore civilization. Negan admits that he is happy that his wife has never seen him like this and says that he would like them to have a child like Carl, but his wife got cancer and the world changed. Michonne says she sees Carl everywhere, and when Negan asks about her own child, she angrily replies that Andre did not survive. Negan says it's better this way because his wife wasn't cut out for the apocalypse. When Negan hints that Andre would make her weak, Michonne throws Negan's food on the ground in anger and leaves. At the dump, Anna kisses the bound and unconscious Gabriel, and then rolls up one of her walking experiments to kill him. He wakes up and begs her to stop, and then says he forgives her. She bends the walker over him and stops, then shuts his mouth with a cloth with chloroform to knock him out. At the camp, Carol is packing up to go to the kingdom when an armed jet and several saviors return. He says that he knows that the Ocean Scions killed the saviors and he needs her to step aside so that he can take revenge. Carol attacks him again, but more rescuers appear and a shootout begins. Rika and Daryl hear gunshots from the ditch and are forced to help each other escape. In Alexandria, Michonne returns to Nina's cell and admits that they are similar, but distinguishes that her worldview is much more positive than his. She finally gets him to eat, and when she leaves, he asks her to see Lucille. Michonne tells him they don't have a bat, claiming it's still out there somewhere, causing him to bang his head hard against the wall. Walkers begin to descend into the pit while Rick and Daryl try to get out. Rick finally crawls out of it and uses a tree branch to pull Daryl out as well. As a horde gathers near the camp, Rick comes up with a plan to take them away, and Daryl heads to the river. Returning to the dump, Gabriel wakes up unbound and alone. In his pocket he finds a note from Anna. "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I want to go fast." He breaks down in tears. At their house, Michonne is reading to Judith about baseball, and she is bothered by the image of the bat. On the way to Alexandria, Maggie notices several walkers killed by Michonne. Elsewhere, as Rick leads the horde away, another horde blocks his path. Rick's horse panics and throws him into a pile of concrete rubble. He falls heavily on the stove, and a piece of rebar pierces his side. Rick screams in pain, but loses consciousness when the walkers approach him. The face wakes up, still pressed against the rebar. As the walkers approach, Rick uses his belt to painfully lift himself off the rebar. He crawls back onto the horse and barely escapes from the herd. Elsewhere, H's van breaks down on the road, and her helicopter radio contact asks if she has a. She lies and confirms that there is, saying that they are ready for transportation. Sitting on a horse, Rick tells himself that he needs to keep the horde close to lead them away. He goes in and out of consciousness and briefly dreams of Herschel's farm, the overturned car of criminals and his hospital room. He drives to an old hut and finds a tablecloth, which he uses as a tourniquet before losing consciousness. In Alexandria, Michonne is spending time with Judith when Scott arrives to inform her of Maggie's arrival. In another dream, Rick rides a horse to Atlanta and finds Shane in their old police car. Suddenly he's inside and they're back on the field on the day he was shot. Rick tells Shane he's looking for his family, and Shane jokes that technically it's his family and asks if he cares about his daughter. Rick jokingly calls him an asshole. Shane praises him for killing him, chewing Joe's throat out and dealing with Garrett, but then asks why he left Negan alive. He urges him to find his rage and get it over with. Rick looks at the hamburgers, which have now turned to dust, and apologizes to Shane for what he did to him. Shane forgives him and furiously tells him to wake up, bringing Rick back to reality long enough to avoid several walkers entering the hut. He barely gets out of the back door and gets on the horse. Back in Alexandria, Maggie shows up at Negan's cell with a crowbar, but is stopped by Michonne. She tells Michonne that Negan was supposed to die under a tree, and Michonne asks if Glenn wanted it. "I do not know what he would have wanted, because I never said goodbye to him," Maggie replies. Eventually, Michonne gives her the keys to his cell, and Maggie goes inside. Negan laughs at her, and Maggie demands that he kneel down. Negan taunts Maggie about killing Glenn and begs her to kill him. She opens the camera and presses him against the wall while he begs for death. Maggie yells at Negan, angrily asking him why she should kill him. He sobs and confesses that he wants to reunite with his wife Lucille. She tells him to go back to the cell, because he is already worse than dead. Maggie goes outside. Suddenly Diane comes running and tells them about the shooting at the camp. On the road, Rick clings to life while the herd continues to chase him. He's hallucinating again, and this time he's back at the farm. Herschel smiles and greets him. Rick hugs him and apologizes for what happened to him and his family, but Herschel reminds him that Maggie is strong. Rick tells him that he has to find his family, but Herschel replies that this is not the case and he just needs to wake up. Rick wakes up and sees hallucinations again. He is back in the hospital and sees the same door, but this time with the inscription "Do not open," dead outside. He goes through it and discovers a pile of dead bodies of all his friends, alive and dead. Rick walks among them until he sees Sasha. She tells him that all this is unreal and it's time for him to wake up. Rick wakes up again and is thrown off his horse at a work camp that has been abandoned since corpses littered the camp. Rika uses her gun to shoot the revived Norris, Katie, another King Omer. The noise attracts the herd, which breaks through the camp, so he gathers strength to limp away, and then falls near the bridge. Suddenly Daryl, Maggie, Carol and Ezekiel and the others rush past him to kill the walkers. Michonne stops and sees Rick's wound. She reminds him that she fell in love with him for being a fighter. After killing the walkers, everyone stops to look at them. Michonne tells Rick how much she loves him, and he tells her, it's not real. Michonne tells him it's real and kisses him before telling him to wake up, and he wakes up, now alone in front of the bridge. The walkers approach, and Rick hobbles away. He crosses the bridge and turns around, hoping to see the walkers fall, but to no avail. The walker passes within a few centimeters of Rick before a crossbow bolt hits him in the head. Rick watches Daryl, Michonne, Maggie and the others arrive nearby. Maggie and Michonne develop a plan to distract the walkers, but Rick doesn't let them do it. He notices dynamite on the bridge, takes aim and says to himself, I found them, after which he shoots dynamite. The bridge catches fire and explodes, and Michonne and the others watch in horror. Believing that Rick is dead, Michonne screams trying to get to him, and Maggie and Carol hold her and comfort her. Daryl cries and then leaves. A helicopter arrives nearby to pick up Anna and her alleged 5. She pulls out a gun, but suddenly notices a wounded Rick on the riverbank, who is still alive. She quickly informs on the radio that she has B, but he is strong and he urgently needs help. She promises that this is an elusive thing, and explains that she is just trying to save a friend who once saved her. They agree to her persuasions and lower the helicopter. Inside, Rick wakes up hooked up to medical equipment, and Anna assures him that he will be fine and that they will save him. The helicopter flies off into the unknown. 6 years later, Magna deals with 2 walkers, after which she tells her group fighting the herd to run. Luke stabs the walker while Coney punches his head with a rock. Kelly hits and kills a walker with a thick branch. When Coney gets up, another walker approaches her from behind. She does not hear his approach. Because of her deafness, Yumika attacks him and kills him. She turns around and kills another one who falls on her, causing her to hit her head on a rock lying on the ground. Magna comes running. She and the others help Yumika up, preparing to fight the herd. They are quickly overpowered, but they are saved by the fact that the walkers around them were shot. Magna and her group escape into the forest and find a young girl who asks for their names. They introduce themselves and asked what her name was. The girl raises her hat and introduces herself to Judith Grimes. In the woods, Michonne talks to an invisible Rick by a ruined bridge about the future and how life goes on and time passes. Elsewhere, an aged Daryl is fishing in a lake and watching nature take over the walkers. In the kingdom, long-haired Carol wakes up next to Ezekiel and admires how everyone works in the community. Michonne finds a sheriff's toy figure in an abandoned car that reminds her of Rick, and grabs it before leaving the place. Meanwhile, Rosita, Eugene, Laura and Aaron find Judith in the woods with Magna's group. Wanting to take them in, Judith declares that she will not return to Alexandria until they accept them. Rosita and the others reluctantly agree. In the kingdom, Carol and Jerry discover a teenage Henry who is trying to fix pipes. Il stays, and Henry mocks him about the deterioration of their community, but Isel warns him to watch his tone. Soon after, Carol reminds Ezekiel and Il that Henry is not wrong, and he could benefit by moving to Hilltop and becoming Earl's student. In Alexandria, Magna's group arrives at the gate, and Judith assures them that they will be safe. They are led inside, where Gracie runs up to Karen. Rosita informs Siddiq about Yumik's condition, and he accompanies her to the infirmary. Magna tries to walk next to her, but the DJ stops her. Michonne arrives on horseback and does not look pleased to see the newcomers. She searches Magna and asks Eugene why they are here. Aaron claims that this is his decision. But Judith corrects, saying that she decided it. Michonne scolds her, but Aaron says that they are here now and must decide their fate together, and Gabriel offers to vote tomorrow. Michonne agrees and orders his men to put them in isolation. She leaves when a sheriff's figurine falls out of her pocket and Judith picks it up. Back in the kingdom, Ezekiel says goodbye to Henry, while not with Carol, preparing for a trip to the hilltop. Henry assures him that they will see each other before the fair, and mentions that the fair is his way to reunite communities. The next day, the church is filled with residents when Magna's group appears before the Council of Alexandria for questioning. They ask who their leader is, and Magna states that they are a team, and Luke explains that their group used to be bigger. Gabriel asks about their former professions. Luke was a music teacher, Magna was a waitress at a truck stop, Coney was a journalist, and Kelly was a high school student. Luke says they should trust them, but Michonne isn't done with the questions yet. She gets up and asks Magna to look at her left arm, which has a prison tattoo on it. Michonne then calls her a hidden knife on her belt, which she puts on the table. Michonne breaks out, stating that she will support any of their petitions. In another room, Gabriel checks the walkie-talkie he found in the woods and tells Rosita that, in his opinion, there may be more survivors who can be helped. He suggests installing a remote amplifier to boost the signal and find new communities, and Rosita asks him to stay in town while she and Eugene install it. Rosita then kisses Gabe and he tells her that she is wonderful. At the house, Judith overhears Michonne pretending to talk to Rick, but Michonne catches her and tells her to do her homework, and they will train later. On the road, Carl tells Henry that they need to turn off the road before going to the Hilton. Suddenly they hear a woman scream. Henry runs to help, but finds Regina with a group of former rescuers. Carol runs towards them with a bow and arrow, and Jet approaches them with a gun and smiles. On the way to the amplifier installation, Eugene asks Rosita about her affair with Gabe and reminds her that some men prefer facts rather than fairy tales, implying that he has feelings for her. Back in Alexandria, Siddiq informs Magna's group about Yumik's condition. Luke asks him if he was there from the very beginning, but Siddiq admits that he was also found in the forest, but in the past everything was different. Elsewhere, Jed tells Carol and Henry that since the shelter was abandoned, they have had to become more desperate. He tells her that he is going to let them go as she spared him at the time, but he takes all their belongings, including her wedding ring. This angers Henry, who picks up his stick and knocks Jed down. Jet throws Henry to the ground, and Carol jumps up and gives him her ring. Jet thanks her and leaves with his men. Outside of Nigan's cell, Judith reads him a math problem about two planes going into collision. He stops her and asks if she has ever seen an airplane. She replies that she has not, so Negan offers her to solve problems applicable in the real world. Judith then tells him that Michonne wants to make Magna's group leave, but she doesn't want them to leave. Negan uses an anecdote from his childhood, a cute at first glance stray dog that has become violent, which means that just because someone looks cute, it doesn't mean that he is. Judith waves him off and says the numbers don't care if the person inside is good or bad. Negan smiles as she leaves. At the top of the water tower, Eugene sets up an amplifier and begins to climb down until he sees that a herd of walkers is heading towards them. Rosita shouts at him to get down, as his horses are scared. Part of the ladder falls, and Eugene jumps down, injuring his knee. Rosita runs up to him with an improvised crutch, and they run off into the woods. At night in Alexandria, the group berates Magna for denying them the chance to stay. Luke asks Magna to give her the necklace, which also serves as a knife, but she does not agree. Magna says they have to make their way through Alexandria to pick up their supplies before setting off, but Connie tells her not to involve Michonne and Judith in this. Luke says they'll save the fight for those who deserve it, and Magna finally gives the necklace away. In the woods, Carol and Henry are camping in an abandoned car. Henry scolds her for not defending herself, but she replies that she couldn't risk him getting hurt. However, some time later, Carol returns to the Savior's camp. She lights a match and reminds Jed that they hurt her son. She throws a match, causing all the rescuers she doused with gasoline, including Jed and Regina, to ignite and die. Back in Alexandria, Magna sneaks up to Michonne's house with another knife. She opens the door slightly, but sees Michonne picking up and hugging the baby, and leaves. A moment later, Magna comes to the door and hands Michonne her knife, telling her that she was right about her. Michonne tells her that they all did something to survive. She closes the door and, turning around, sees Judith on the stairs with her father's gun. She says her father would like her to do what she did, and Michonne agrees. Michonne tells her that one day she will understand why she made Magna's group leave. Judith reveals that she knows Michonne is still talking to Rick and Carl, although she has already begun to forget their voices, which shocks her. When Judith leaves, Rick and Michonne's son, RJ, runs up to Michonne and asks for food. In the woods, Eugene slows down as he and Rosita continue to run away from walkers. He offers to stay behind to distract them and says he has something to say to her. She asks him not to do anything strange and forces him to continue on his way. Elsewhere, Carol and Henry find Daryl and asks him to come with them. He smiles and agrees. In Alexandria, Michonne undresses, exposing an X-shaped scar on her lower back that she has received somewhere in the last 6 years. She sniffs one of Rick's old jackets and puts it on. Outside, Magna's group prepares to leave Alexandria, thanking everyone for their hospitality. Michonne pulls up and says she's going to accompany them to Hilltop with Sadiq instead to see if they'll accept Magna's group. Back in the woods, Rosita and Eugene roll into a ditch and get covered in mud as the walkers approach. They remain motionless, but experience shock and horror when walkers pass by them and whisper to each other. In the forest, Rosita runs alone and is scared, fleeing from walkers, while she hears whispers. Leaning against a tree, she gets tired and eventually falls. Elsewhere, Daryl accompanies Carol and Henry to their camp by the dam. As he feeds his dog, Carol asks him when he last ate. The dog ate yesterday, he answers and leaves. On the way to the Hilton, Ceedee tells Michonne that she should have let Magna's group stay in Alexandria, but Magna replies that she still doesn't trust them and is only doing it for her daughter's sake. In the cart, Magna complains to her group that Michonne has her knives, and she wants them back. Yumika tells Michonne that she is just upset about their lost friend Bernie. In the prosperous Hilltop, residents are engaged in sewing, and Enid conducts an examination in the infirmary. Meanwhile, at the Barrington house, Tara asks Jesus about the news about Maggie. He replies that she is with Herschel and Georgia, and that she has sent another letter in which she admits that she is happy. Tara informs him about some minor problems in their community and congratulates him on his re-election as leader. He reminds her that he ran unopposed, but Tara offers him to take Maggie's office, and he refuses. Back at Daryl's camp, Carol asks why he's been living in the woods for so long, and he replies that it's quiet there. She informs him of Henry's move to Hilltop while she deals with matters in the kingdom. Daryl asks why she's here, and she replies that she wants him to go with them. "Do you want me to sit with your boy?" Daryl growls. Carol admits that Heinrich could use a mentor to toughen him up, but Daryl says he will have to learn by himself. Elsewhere, Michonne and the others are staying at Magna's container with supplies that were destroyed by walkers. Magna gets upset at the sight of Bernie's things, and Michonne instructs the DJ to collect more weapons. This is angry, and Michonne also announces that she is returning to Alexandria in the morning, and Sadiq and DJ help them finish the journey. Magna and Luke begin to rage, but Yumika calms them down and they reluctantly agree to her terms. They decide to find shelter for the night. On the way, Aaron runs into Jesus on horseback, and the two playfully fight in the field until they get tired. Jesus asks if Michonne has changed her mind about joining the upcoming fair, but Aaron says she won't even put the question to a second vote. Suddenly, a signal rocket is launched into the air nearby, and they rush there to sort it out. At the tree they find a wounded Rosita, who tells them that she left Eugene in the barn. Before several walkers get close to her, they grab her and promise to look for Eugene tomorrow. At his camp, Daryl removes the skin from the snake and throws it on the fire for dinner, and Henry asks Carol if she brought him here so that Daryl would be his escort. In the evening, Carol gives Daryl a haircut, and he tells her that he never found Rick's body and got used to the forest. Carol advises him to forget about it. Later, when they are having dinner, Henry asks Daryl where he got the scar on his eye, but he ignores him and goes to look for the dog. At night, when they are hiding in the factory, Michonne hears a noise and discovers Luke standing facing away and holding something in his hands. She thinks it's a weapon and tells him to drop it and turn around, but he says he can't. When he turns around, Michonne strikes down with the sword, and Luke finds himself with a dismembered violin in his hands, waking up the rest of the group. Meanwhile, Henry pursues Daryl and finds a walker instead. Daryl shows up and asks if he was following him. Suddenly Daryl hears a wild dog barking nearby and rushes to him to find him trapped and surrounded by walkers. Daryl fights off the walkers to save the dog, and before the walker can bite him, Henry jumps up and saves him. "I told you not to approach," swears Daryl. Carol stealthily lets down a bow and arrow from the bushes. At the hilltop, Tara informs Jesus about Rosita's condition and asks what they were doing there. Jesus admits that he trained Aaron, trying to persuade Alexandria to take part in the fair. She scolds him and says that people notice his constant absence from the hilltop. She says she's leaving tomorrow to look for Eugene and that he should stay. At the camp, Henry notices an X-shaped scar on Daryl's back, the same as Michonne's when he changes his shirt. He sits down next to him and tells him that this is the first time the dog has fallen into his trap. Henry thanks him for saving him and says that Carol misses and worries about him. "She knows how to find me," Daryl says. Henry suggests that he go with them to Hilltop. Daryl asks if it's so he can keep an eye on him, but Henry says it's not just me. Back at the factory, Luke looks at the broken Stradivarius with disbelief and explains to Michonne that the violin was old and rare. Yumika puts her head on Magnesium's leg and playfully recalls the mansion where they found her. Luke says that music is the only thing that distinguishes them from animals, and how it united people in the past, leaving Michonne in a reverie. In the morning, Siddiq tries to convince Michonne to go with them again, but she says she can't take any chances because of Maggie. Siddiq tells her that Maggie and Herschel left last fall, shocking her. Before he can explain, a DJ arrives and informs him that there are walkers outside. The group gets out of the car and discovers that several walkers are blocking the way to their horses. Michonne kills several walkers, and Magna demands that they return their weapons. Michonne finally gives up and orders the DJ to return their guns. When Magna's group splits up and destroys several walkers, Bernie's undead appears, which deeply upsets them. Heartbroken Magna can't put him down, and Michonne does it for her. The group opens a clean path and leaves. Back at camp, Daryl loads up his motorcycle for a trip to Hilltop, and Carol seems very happy that she convinced him to come. On the way, Michonne sympathizes with Yumika and Magnesium, saying that she understands their pain from the loss of a friend who is considered family. Siddiq apologizes for not telling her about Maggie earlier, explaining that she and Herschel left with Georgie to help build a new community far away from here. Suddenly, two soldiers from Hilltop drive up to them and inform them that Rosita is wounded and is being cared for in the Hilltop. Michonne tells them to tell Alexandria that they are heading to the Hilltop. Coney notices something nearby that confuses the group, but tells them it's okay. When they leave, someone is watching them from the bushes. Daryl, Carol and Henry appear in the Hilltop and hug Tara. Carol tells Jesus that Henry wants to learn how to be a blacksmith. Iron greets Daryl and tells him that they will need his help in finding Eugene. Henry tries to go with them, but Carol says he has to stay and she will help him find a home. A group of rescuers gathers when Jesus tells Tara that he will go instead of her and promise to stay next time, to which Ona agrees. With the dog at the head, Daryl, Aaron and Jesus go in search of Eugene. In the woods, Daryl, Aaron and Jesus watch the herd swarming in the middle of the field. They talk about how unusual it is that walkers do this. When they leave the herd, a strange-looking walker watches them. In Alexandria, Gabriel helps Negan meditate in his cell. Negan praises him for Rosita and boasts that he has heard interesting things about her from gossip near his cell. Gabe ignores him and leaves. Outside, Barbara informs him that Rosita is injured and is in the Hilltop. At the Hilltop, everyone runs inside when Michonne and Siddiq are staying with Magna and her group. From the guard post, Diana forces everyone to hand over their weapons before going inside. Inside, Tara coldly greets Michonne and informs her about the situation with Eugene, Aaron, Daryl and Rosita. She then informs Magna's group that they will have to wait for Jesus' return before they make a decision about their future, but they can stay until his return. Connie thanks her for everyone. From the house, Michonne smiles at Carol, but she is ignored. Later, Magna asks Yumika why the hilltop is headed by a guy named Jesus, saying it looks like a cult, but the horse assures her that it's probably just a nickname. Yumika suggests that they work on proving their worth so that they can stay. Michonne then introduces the new group to Carol, who happily introduced herself in sign language, which Coney appreciated. Carol asks Michonne about Judith and RJ, and then tells her about Henry's move to Hilltop. Carol asks if she can send a delegate from Alexandria to the fair, but Michonne refuses. Carol begs, but Michonne does not give up and wishes her, Henry and Ezekiel all the best. In the woods, Jesus tells Aaron that Daryl used to trade with Hilltop, and then stopped visiting him. Aaron urges him to accept his new leadership role when Daryl interrupts them and says he hears walkers nearby through the wind. As they leave, Jesus looks suspiciously at the approaching flock. Back at Hilltop, Henry says goodbye to Carol, promising her to be proud of him. Diana asks Carol if she can go to the kingdom with her, and she agrees. At the blacksmith shop, Earl and Nit check on Henry and joke with him. Earl invites him to dinner, although he initially refuses, but agrees after seeing both Nit and Alden kissing. In Alexandria, Negan mocks Gabriel, forcing him to clean the pot to the point that he loses his temper. Gabe admits that he is upset that he has to take care of him while Rosita recovers in the hilltop. Negan expresses sincere sympathy, but an angry Gabriel remains silent and leaves. Back at Hilltop, everyone eats in the dining room, except lonely Henry. A group of teenagers notices him and invites him to walk with them in the woods. In the infirmary, Siddiq apologizes to Michonne for keeping secrets from her. Suddenly Rosita wakes up in a panic and tells them that she knows where Eugene is. They tell her that Daryl and the others are already looking for him, but after her screams that the others do not know what they are dealing with, they become confused. At night, Daryl, Jesus and Aaron find Eugene hiding in the basement of the barn. A frightened Eugene warns them that a herd of walkers is looking for him and they need to leave immediately. It was an unusual herd, they were whispering to each other, he tells them. They look at him in confusion, when suddenly the dog light, warning them about the approaching herd. Elsewhere, Henry is drinking with his new friends in a barn outside the Hilton. Gage invites them to have fun and leads them to a covered pit in the ground with a walker inside. Eddie leaves when they throw rope rings at him and Rodney urinates on him. Henry jumps into the pit and kills the walker out of mercy. Gage gets mad at Henry for not doing his job and leaves him there. Returning to the misty forest, Eugene suggests to the group that the walkers are evolving. Daryl says it's nonsense when Aaron notices them coming. Jesus demands that they separate, but Daryl says that instead he will lead the herd away while he and Aaron take Eugene to the horses. In Alexandria, Negan is playing with a tennis sword until he notices that the door is moving slightly because of the wind, which confuses him. He touches the door and discovers that it has been left open. He thinks for a moment, but smiles and walks away. At the hilltop, Tara takes Earl to jail, where Henry sits in a cell as punishment for bad behavior. Erla threatens to send Henry back to the kingdom. Henry explains that his society is counting on him and begs to give him another chance. Sympathizing with him because of his own past mistakes, Erla promises to talk to Jesus when he returns, stating that the minimum punishment for a drunk and violent is 2 days in a cell. However, Earl tells Henry that he will have a lot of work to do when he gets out, which suggests that Earl intends to keep him as his apprentice. Back in the woods, Daryl sets off fireworks to redirect the herd, but a group of walkers ignores the noise and the others follow suit, leaving him in shock. Meanwhile, Aaron, Jesus and Eugene find themselves in a foggy cemetery. They quickly find themselves trapped behind a locked gate, forcing Jesus and Aaron to go kill walkers while they hear whispers around. Michonne, Magna and Yumika suddenly appear to help them unlock the gate. Jesus tells Aaron and Eugene to get out while he finishes off the walkers, and begins killing several with a sword. He is about to kill the latter, but when he attacks him, the walker dodges and stabs him in the chest from behind, shocking everyone. "You're where you don't belong," the walker whispers to the shocked Jesus and throws him to the ground. Aaron shouts no, and runs into the house, followed by Michonne, Magna and Yumika. Daryl arrives at the cemetery with the dog and shoots the walker in the head, while several others attack the group with guns. The group finishes them off. When Aaron approaches the body of Jesus, Daryl notices something on the back of the walker's head and cuts it open, exposing the mask. Before they have time to think about the situation, the whispers around them get louder, and the group gathers in a circle, preparing for a fight. In Alexandria, Negan sneaks through the garden and steals a shovel. He enters Judith's room, examines one of her drawings, and then takes the compass. At dawn, he puts on his usual clothes and starts climbing over the fence, but Judith stops him with a gun. He laughs and suggests they go their separate ways, but she doesn't back down. Negan goes downstairs and Judith reminds him that there is nothing there for him. He promises not to hurt anyone, and she finally gives up, promising that if she sees him again, they will shoot. At the hilltop, Luke offers to help Tara, Alden and Nit find the others who have not returned. On the way, Michonne tells Daryl that they will bring Jesus back to Hilltop, and thanks Daryl for helping her with everything. Suddenly, the group notices a small group of walkers nearby. Daryl corners them on the bridge and uses his crossbow to see which of them are the Whisperers. He hits one of them in the leg, and he falls, screaming in pain, attracting walkers to himself. The others are trying to slowly move to the other side, where Michonne is waiting for them. They pull out knives and attack, but Michonne and the others easily kill them, and the last Whisperer kneels down to surrender. Daryl tears off her mask and sees a girl begging to save her. Michonne angrily asks her about her band. The girl claims that she was the last one left and that they killed everyone. When new walkers appear, Daryl decides to take her with him. In the forest, Negan walks and kills several walkers. Then he drinks from the river, and then spits out the water. He notices that he is in the clearing where he killed Abraham and Glenn, and looks down, remembering his actions. There is a group with the body of Jesus and a captive girl in the hilltop, which causes distrust among the entire community. Tammy tells Tara that Hilltop will now rely on her leadership, reminding her that this includes justice for Jesus. In the basement, Daryl throws the girl into the cell and tells Henry that Jesus is dead. Michonne tears the blindfold off the girl's eyes and exclaims, "No more shit." Meanwhile, Negan rummages through an abandoned clothing store and finds himself a black faux leather jacket. Suddenly 3 hungry dogs appear, forcing him to hide. He runs outside and throws a walker in there to escape from the dogs. Elsewhere, Luke and Alden are making music until they find one of Yumik's arrows on a tree. They kill a few walkers, and Luke suggests they follow the arrows to find their friends. They notice a herd nearby and think about their next actions. Back at Hilltop, the survivor interrogates the girl. She claims that she has no name and that her group is just good people who are trying to survive. Michonne asks if her people know about the hilltop, but the girl begs to leave her alone. Outside, Michonne tells Derry-Wit Tara that she is going back to Alexandria. Tara agrees and says she will let Magna's group stay because that's what Jesus would do. Michonne tells Daryl that she knows the girl is lying and secretly reminds him that he knows what to do if the girl continues to refuse to talk. In the infirmary, Siddiq sets Eugene's knee and goes to get a bandage. Eugene tells Rosita that he was afraid she had died and tries to confess his love, but she runs out into the street saying "I can't." Rosita vomits, and Siddiq goes to ask if she is all right, but she tells him that she is pregnant with his child. Eugene watches with horror what is happening from the inside. Nearby, Daryl scolds Henry for his stupid behavior and reminds him that he has one more night left in the cell before he can be released. Meanwhile, Negan returns to the shelter. He finds everything abandoned and runs into one of his zombie saviors, Richie. Negan ironically praises Richie, saying that he is devoted to the end. Back at Hilltop, Aaron apologizes to Michonne for doubting her, claiming that Alexandria is self-sufficient enough without Hilltop. Michonne also apologizes, and then informs Daryl that he should stay at the Hilltop to help Tara, and offers him to lead the work of interrogating the girl so as not to lose anyone else. Back at the hideout, Negan is sitting alone in his council room when Richie suddenly stops knocking on the door. After investigating, Negan discovers that Richie was distracted by other walkers. Negan goes out into the yard and kills all the walkers except Big Richie, whom he leads back to the door. Inside, he looks at the compass, Judith, and smiles, remembering their conversation. He then decides to kill Richie and leave. The funeral of Jesus takes place in the hilltop and everyone takes turns hammering nails into his coffin. Daryl looks sadly at what is happening, and then rushes back to prison to demand that the girl reveal her identity. Henry tries to intervene, but Daryl pushes him away. He presses her against the bars and asks if she comes from places where there are walls. She tells him that places like Hilltop never live long, and her mom told her that they need the dead to stay safe. She tells him that only she is her mother left, but he calls her a liar and drags her to the exit. She begs for her life, and he lets her go back to the cell. He then reminds Henry of his place and warns him that he will sit in this cell until he realizes this. After he leaves, the girl thanks Henry for saving her and introduces herself as Lydia. Outside, by the window, Daryl listens to their conversation. On the way, Negan drives a motorcycle, but bumps into Judith standing in the middle of the road with a raised gun. She shoots, causing him to fall. She says a lot of people are looking for him. He gives her the compass and says he wants to return to Alexandria because she was right, there is nothing there for him. Judith escorts him back to Alexandria. At the hilltop, Nit tells Magna about his concerns about Alden. Magna assures her that he is in safe hands, with Luke by his side. In the woods, Alden and Luke notice a walker who stares at them motionlessly. Suddenly they are surrounded by several whisperers, and the leader throws them one of the arrows they were following, points a shotgun at them and says, "The ramp ends." In a flashback at the beginning of the apocalypse, young Lydia and her parents are hiding in a shelter. Frank says that no one will come for them, but Alpha assures Lydia that he is joking and sings to her to calm her down. In the present, Lydia tells her story to Henry in her cell at the hilltop. Henry tells Lydia about Carol, who is willing to do anything to protect him. He asks her about her parents, and Lydia remembers that her father died from a knife wound. She says her mother is also relentless and doesn't want to get involved with anyone. Outside, Daryl sits by the window and listens to their conversation. In the forest, Tara leads Magna of her groups in search of Alden and Luke. They find a group of walkers feasting on horses and kill them while checking to see if they are whispering. Coney notices that the horses have been opened and skinned with knives. Tara realizes that Lydia lied that only her mother was there, and decides that they should go back to the hilltop until they figure out what it is. Back in his cell at the hilltop, Henry offers Lydia an egg. She tells him to keep it for himself and that hunger is a gift. She asks why he is so kind to her, and he replies that he, his brother and his father were in a complete mess when they were first found there, and it took a lot of kind people to make everything all right again. Lydia says that her father said that everything will never be fine. In another flashback, Frank wants to leave the shelter with the other people because supplies are running out, but Alpha decides that they will stay to protect their daughter. He calls her delusional and starts cutting his beard, saying that with the advent of the apocalypse, he now does what he wants. Alpha distracts Lydia with a game of checkers and says checkmate. Lydia smiles and says it's chess. In the cell, Henry tells Lydia that her mom seems nice, and reveals that he and his foster parents are from another community called Kingdom, which is one day away from Hilltop. Suddenly Daryl comes downstairs and picks up Henry. On the street, Daryl scolds Henry for putting his family in danger and tells him that he used him to get information out of her. Henry loses his temper, considering Lydia a good person. He calls Daryl an asshole and tells him to get the information himself. Daryl returns to Lydia's cell and offers her medication to help the rumors, but she refuses. He tells her that Luke and Alden are missing, but she replies that she doesn't know anything about it. Then he asks her if her mom will kill their people if she crosses them. Lydia replies that she would kill if she had to. In another flashback, some survivors are startled when gunshots ring out from outside the shelter. Alpha jumps on a panicked Mathis and accidentally strangles him when Mathis tries to leave. Frank comforts Lydia by singing to her while he watches the Alpha. In the present, Daryl tells Lydia that her mom did everything possible to keep Lydia alive. Lydia pulls her ear again, and Daryl throws her medication, reminding her that the people at the hilltop will help her if she helps them. She asks him for water, and when he comes closer, she tries to grab him. He grabs her arm and pulls up her sleeve, exposing a series of cuts, forcing her to retreat into a corner. Daryl looks at her for a while and then walks away. In the trailer, Yumika suggests they go in search of Luke again, but Magna warns that they could lose everything if they disobey Tara's wishes. Kaylee says that she saw several children getting out of the hilltop, and agrees with Yumika that they should look for Luke. They hold a vote and decide to leave that night. At night, Daryl visits Lydia again to find out more about her bruises. She says she got them from her mom. Daryl asks why she doesn't tell him where she is. He says she's safer here than there. She disagrees and says that her mother's abuse has made her callous. Daryl calls it nonsense, but Lydia says staying soft will kill you. In another flashback, Alpha, now with shorter hair, sits alone while Frank, now with a beard, checks on Lydia and comforts her. Later, when everyone is asleep, Lydia gets up and looks at Matthias' body. Since the survivors were unable to pierce Matthias' head, he turns and walks towards Lydia. She screams, and Frank rushes to save her, but gets bitten in the neck. In the present, Lydia tells Daryl that her father was weak, but he is strong and he does not belong in the hilltop. Daryl replies that she doesn't know a damn thing about him, and leaves. Outside, Henry confronts Daryl, but he declares that Lydia is now Tara's problem. Henry realizes that Daryl was most likely abused himself, which Daryl neither confirms nor denies. Henry tells him that he overheard Carol telling Ezekiel that her hair was short because he pulled her by it and mocked her when it was long. He assumes it took her that long to feel safe again. Daryl listens thoughtfully as Henry tells him that he knows Lydia's people are bad, but he doesn't think Lydia is bad. He thinks she's just scared, and Daryl can show her there's nothing to be afraid of. Meanwhile, in the forest, Magna and the others find new tracks that may belong to the Whisperers. As the herd approaches, Yumika thinks about leaving. Magna and Coney support her, but Kelly breaks down and reminds them that Luke saved her in Coalport. Coney comforts her and tells Magnesium Yumika to come back without them, and she will stay and talk to Kelly. A Whisperer is secretly watching them from the forest. Back at Hilltop, Henry releases Lydia from her cell so they can take a walk outside. Lydia immediately grabs a worm from the ground and eats it. She gives one to Henry, who does the same. Henry shows her around while she secretly hides a hammer behind her back. She almost hits him with a hammer until she hears the baby crying, which triggers even more traumatic memories from the orphanage. Then she asks Henry to take her back to her cell. He agrees while Daryl watches them at close range. In the cell, Lydia asks Henry to stay with her. They hold hands through the bars and fall asleep. The next morning, Daryl finds them holding hands. Lydia asks for pills, promising not to attack this time. She admits that she tried to get information from them and that if her mom really found Luke and Alden, then they are most likely dead. She then explains that her people are always on the move and that her memories were messed up because her mom lied to her. Lydia admits that her father was caring, and her mother was a monster. In another memory, a mother bites another person, and horror begins in the orphanage. In the midst of Alpha begins to beat the boards from the windows and says that they are leaving. Frank doesn't want to leave his friends, but Alpha says that they are idiots who have been contacted and are putting them in danger. Frank refuses to leave and says Lydia is staying with him. Then he tells Lydia to wait for him while he checks the stairs. Alpha follows him and kills him. Returning to the present, Lydia cries and apologizes to Daryl for wasting his time, but he says that this is not the case and goes outside. Henry follows him and asks why a mother does this to her child. Daryl tells him that some people aren't meant to be parents. Henry asks if Lydia can stay. Daryl says we'll see, and tells Henry to bring Lydia fresh clothes while he talks to the old one about their camp. Henry tells Daryl that he's glad he and Mom are friends. Meanwhile, Magna and Yumika return to Hilltop. At the guard post, Yumika apologizes to Tara for leaving, and Tara tells her to talk to her next time. Suddenly, Yumika notices a small group of whisperers approaching the hilltop. Troy, Quan and the other guards grab Kelly to drag her inside, while Coney hides in a cornfield. Tara calls Daryl and Magna downstairs to join them at the security post. In front of the gate, Alpha stops her group and introduces herself, telling them that she just wants her daughter back. In the flashback, both Carol and Jerry are in a clearing in the woods. Jerry informs Ikea and Carol that Navila is pregnant, and the jubilant congratulates him. Suddenly, Jesus and Tara drive up to them. Tara tells them that she has left Alexandria, and before leaving, she passes the community charter to Ikeel. He promises Carol that someday the community leaders will sign it all together. In the present, Ikea looks longingly at the charter in the kingdom. Diana informs him of plans to go deer hunting. Outside, everyone is preparing things for the fair. Carol catches up with Ezekiel and decides to accompany him. At the hilltop, Ennett treats Earl for an injury and offers him to retire, but he refuses. Tammy thanks Enid for her help and assures her that Alden will definitely show up. Then Mark runs up and informs that the people who killed Jesus have come. Outside, Alpha and the Whisperers are waiting for Lydia to be brought to them. Daryl asks them to leave, and the Alpha signals for more Whisperers to appear. Magna asks Alpha if they killed her people. Alpha says no, and promises that if they don't bring her Lydia, there will be a conflict. Meanwhile, Coney is hiding in a cornfield nearby. Daryl decides to go outside to talk to Alpha face to face. In the forest, Ezekiel offers Carol to go with another caravan to the kingdom, and he goes with another group. Carol senses that something is wrong and explains that he and his men have planned a small side mission to grab something for the fair. Carol agrees to go with him, and they go to an abandoned movie theater. At the hilltop, Daryl goes outside, and Alpha instructs one of his men to bring someone. Daryl informs Alpha that he is ready to fight with her people so that she does not return Lydia, until he notices one of the Whisperers with a child. Alpha explains that they are animals, and animals have children. Suddenly, a pair of Whisperers brings Alden and Luke bound and gagged. Alpha offers to exchange them both for his daughter. At the cinema, Carol explains that she wants to find a lamp for the projector, but she is understandably upset that they are risking a lot for such a trifle. Ezekiel explains how important this can be for the family, and she agrees. Jerry then uses a tape recorder to distract the walkers from the theater. There is a herd in Hilto, and Alpha orders his men to distract them. Luke spots Coney in the cornfields and tells her in sign language behind her back to keep quiet. Inside the house, Daryl informs Neat that he is going to make an exchange when Magna says that Lydia Henry is missing. He tells everyone to split up and find them. He gives their scent to the dog and sends him on his way. Outside, the Whisperer's baby starts crying, which attracts walkers. Alpha shrugs, indicating to the mother that she should leave the baby to die. The mother removes the sling from her shoulder and puts the child on the ground. Alden and Luke try to shout at them not to do it, but Alpha explains that this is natural selection. Inside, Daryl discovers that Henry and Lydia have disappeared from the cell. Eddie says he knows where they went. She and Nit go in search of them, and Daryl is delayed. Outside, the guards are hitting the fence to distract walkers from the child, but this does not help. Luke frantically orders Coney to grab the baby, and she runs out of the cornfield, shoots the incoming man with a slingshot and grabs him. The Whisperers around her draw their blades, and the horse runs back into the cornfield. Daryl runs in and kills the walkers around her, and Kelly, Tammy and Earl save her. Back at the cinema, Carol helps Ezekiel remove the frame from the movie poster to use it for his charter. Carol suggests that if the fair doesn't unite everyone, they should stay at the hilltop. Meanwhile, Jerry carefully takes out a lamp for the projector, and Diana accompanies him. After he packs the lamp into the lining, walkers suddenly attack, causing him to drop the lamp into the theater teeming with walkers below. In the woods, Henry and Lydia are hiding in a cabin when Amit and Eddie show up. Henry refuses to give up Lydia, but Enid explains that Alden and Luke's lives are at risk. Enid tells him about how she saw the death of her parents and how Carl told her that she should live not only for the sake of survival. Henry is torn, and Lydia offers to give herself up to save their friends. She kisses Henry and leaves. Back at the theater, Jerry tells Ezekiel about the lamp, and he decides to leave, but Carol intervenes and develops a plan for her return. They deal with the walkers, take the lamp and finally hit the road. When they leave, a strange symbol appears on the back of the road sign. In the hilltop, Daryl gives Lydia to Alpha in exchange for Alden and Luke, who are embraced by a group of Ennett and Magna. Lydia says "I'm sorry, Mom," for which she gets a strong slap in the face. She orders Lydia to address her as Alpha, just like everyone else. She then smiles at Daryl as they leave. Later, Henry tells Daryl that what they did was wrong, but Daryl reminds him that they had to do it and they'll just have to live with it. At night in the kingdom, and Carol put the letter in the frame and kiss while Jerry turns on the movie projector. At the Hilton, Magna's group drinks, Enid and Alden sleep together, Tammy Earl takes care of a new baby rescued from the Whisperers, and Henry leaves his bed. Outside, Edie gives Daryl a note from Henry, where he writes that he left to find Lydia. Nearby, Coney, sitting on a table, stops Daryl and writes him a note, stating that he wants to go with him. He reluctantly agrees, and they hit the road. In the forest, Alpha asks Lydia about her stay in the hilltop. She talks about their farmlands, supplies and weapons, but is silent about their relationships with other communities, such as the kingdom. Alpha is disappointed with her lack of information. In Alexandria, Michonne berates her council for keeping her in the dark about their radio assignment. Gabriel argues that they should be more open to new communities, but Aaron reminds him of the Whisperers and that they should trust Michonne's discretion. Siddiq claims that she is not always right, her decision to sever ties with the kingdom proves it. Michonne takes a hard line and declares that she is not ready to sacrifice her people to save the kingdom. Later, Gabriel briefly tells Rosita about his problems at the council. He did not elaborate, and she started talking about her pregnancy, saying that she wanted him to stay, despite the fact that she was carrying Siddiq's child. Elsewhere, Henry catches up with Lydia and the Whisperers and watches them at close range. One of the Whisperers asks him to lower his staff, but Henry knocks him out. Suddenly Beta grabs Henry from behind and throws him in front of Alpha. The Alpha asks him questions about it and threatens to break his arm. Henry gives up and says that he came alone to pick up Lydia. She calls him stupid and slaps him in the face. Alpha decides that Henry will go with them. Back in Alexandria, Eugene shows Gabriel his carefully documented calculations of risk and benefit, whether he should stay with Rosita or not. Gabriel waves him off, but Eugene warns him that he would be a fool if he let her go. He then offers him a new pair of sweatpants to give to Rosita as a peace offering. Back in the woods, Alpha asks Lydia why she didn't mention Henry, but she replies that he's not worth mentioning. Alpha reminds her that he just risked his life to save her, so she must be lying. They stay in the Whispering Camp, which is full of people without walking masks. Alpha instructs Betty to tie Henry to a tree and bring Lydia a new mask. In Alexandria, Michonne visits Negan in his cell to ask why he came back. He tells her that he could have smashed her head in her house, but decided not to. Michonne suggests that he actually tried to try the outside world, but was spat back out when he found nothing. He confirms her theory and suggests that she start trusting him if she is not going to kill him and that he could help her with her problems. She refuses him and then sees Judith watching them from her cell window. In the woods, Coney and Daryl are looking for Henry and realize that the Whisperers have caught up with him. They kill several walkers, and Coney smiles as Daryl gives orders to his dog. At the Whisperers' camp, Beta removes the skin from the walker's head to use it for Lydia's mask. A man and a woman Whisperers approach her and ask why she broke her own rule to leave people if they are taken away. They point out that they abandoned 2 people for her daughter. "I don't like this math," Sean whispers. Alpha reminds them that she did it to get information. Sean challenges her leadership role. The Alpha laughs in his face, grabs the man from behind and puts a long knife to his throat. Alpha confirms that he has the right to challenge her position, but she has the right to defend it. Then she turns her attention to Helen and says that she is the one who wants to become the new leader. Helen tells Alpha that she let everyone down by exposing them to danger. Alpha tells her that her people are voluntarily following her because she ensures their safety. Alpha wraps a wire around Helen's neck and beheads her, while Henry looks on in horror. Then the Alpha gives the head to Sean, tells him that crying is for the weak, and stabs him in the stomach. At their house, Michonne asks Judith why she was spying on her before. Judith says that she was actually there to see Negan, and says that she sometimes talks to him out of sympathy. Michonne calmly explains why this is a bad idea, but Judith claims that he really listens to her. Michonne firmly demands that she not approach him, because he is a monster, and if he is released, he will continue to be a monster. Judith reminds her that he came out and wasn't a monster, proving that he has changed. Michonne says people don't change, but Judith responds, "You've changed." Michonne sends her to her room and starts crying. At the Whispering Camp, Lydia reveals to Henry that she still has the wooden coin he gave her hanging from her necklace, signaling that she is secretly supporting him. In her tent, Alpha tells Betty about the time before the apocalypse when she hit Lydia hard for nearly suffocating in a dry cleaning bag. She tells him that people do everything they can to protect those they love. "We have to be ready when they come for the boy," Beta says. They both agree that Henry can be useful, and they need to find out if Lydia really has feelings for him. On the field, a few Whisperers are gathering a herd while Daryl and the horses are watching them. In Alexandria, Gabriel visits Rosita to discuss everything. Eugene watches them from afar and smiles. Meanwhile, Michonne comes to Aaron to inform him that she has decided to allow the council to send a delegation to the Kingdom Fair. Aaron objects, but Michonne says people should be able to decide for themselves. "I hope we won't regret it," says Aaron. Later, Alexandria prepares a caravan with food and supplies to be sent to the kingdom for the fair. At night, Beta takes Henry to Alpha. She forces Lydia to take a knife and tells her to kill Henry to prove her loyalty. Lydia starts crying when she approaches Henry. Alpha warns her not to be weak like her father and that if she doesn't kill him, Beta will kill them both. Suddenly, a small herd of walkers appears and begins to eat the unmasked Whisperers. Alpha and the others quickly put on their masks to try to scare off the herd, while Daryl and Connie come disguised as Whisperers to rescue Henry. They grab Henry, who grabs Lydia, and together they run away. In the woods, after their daring escape from the Whisperers, Daryl blames Lydia for dragging them into this story and says she can't go back to the Hilton with them. Connie and Henry refuse to leave her and run away with her in another direction. Daryl reluctantly follows them. At the Whisperers' camp, Beta comforts a dying Whisperer and then tells the tracker to find Lydia. In the kingdom, everything is almost ready for the fair. Navila tells Carol that this is all they fought for. She then spots Jerry bruised and without armor after returning from a supply mission. At the theater, Jerry tells Ezekiel that his patrol was attacked by a group called Robbers and robbed them, giving a note warning that everyone who goes to the fair will be turned back if they do not pay the toll. Diana suggests that it could be a group of Jed saviors, but Carol rules out this possibility, knowing that she killed him. Ezekiel decides that they must fight these marauders, and instructs Jerry to gather all his fighters. On the road, Tara and Magna's group removes a tree from their path while Tammy tells Earl how glad she is to have a baby. Kelly informs Tara that she is worried about the horse, but she and Magna assure her that Daryl is fine. In the woods, Daryl and Coney develop a plan to use an office building to separate the Whisperers from the undead. Lydia warns Daryl that Alpha is going to send Beta, their best fighter. "We'll kill him first," Daryl promises. Elsewhere, Jerry and Carol are exploring a community of robbers. Carol suggests they try to talk to them first, and if that doesn't work, then they'll kill them. Back at the office building, Coney tells Daryl that her group used the building to hide supplies under a removable floor panel. They argue about how to proceed, and Connie says that Lydia should come back with them because she has no friends who could protect her. Meanwhile, Keel, Carol and Jerry infiltrate the robbers' base, where the leader, Ozzy, informs them that the meeting is only for the king. They disagree by staying on the side of Orr. Ozzy asks if they have his pay, while his men approach with pistols and melee weapons at the ready. He offers to use Ezeki or as a ransom, when suddenly the kingdom's fighters grab people, Ossus from behind. And Izkiel takes out his sword and says he is ready to fight for what they have created. He then offers the man a job clearing roads for him in exchange for access to the kingdom and the fair. Ozzy laughs in his face and grabs Jerry's sword, saying they'll have to try. Carol then asks when they last watched a movie, and a shocked Ozzy replies, "Seriously?" In the building, Henry gives Lydia a spear he made, and she reminds him that she does not want to kill her own people. He takes it back and tells her that he will try not to do it either. Lydia scolds him for risking his life for her. He reminds her that he cares about her, and they kiss. Daryl interrupts them and tells them to keep watching. On the way, a small herd of walkers approaches Tara and Magna's group. They take a stand and remind themselves to watch out for the Whisperers. Tammy puts the baby in a box with air holes and then kills several walkers to save Earl. Suddenly, robbers arrive on horseback and introduce themselves to Tari after helping to deal with the herd, accepting the deal of Carol and Ezeki. Then they accompany them to the kingdom. On the balcony of a high-rise building, Lydia notices a group of walkers and Whisperers walking along the road to the building. At the center of the group are Beta, who calmly orders his men to disperse while Daryl shoots one of the Whisperers. Beta and his men rush inside and quickly discover a trap designed to separate them from the dead. Meanwhile, Daryl forces Lydia to hide in the closet with the dog while the Whisperers crawl upstairs. Henry knocks out one of them, and Coney shoots the other with a slingshot. Daryl aims his crossbow at the main door, which is knocked out by Beta using the other door as a shield. Daryl regroups and hits the Whisperer through the tarp with a fire axe while Coney and Henry track down the others. The Whisperer wounds Henry in the leg, but then he is captured by a dog, which was released by a desperate Lydia after hearing that Henry was in danger. Henry finishes off the Whisperer while Lydia goes to help Henry, and the horse deals with another Whisperer who attacked her. Daryl cuts Zion's throat, and then Beta attacks him, whose size frightens him. They evaluate each other, and Beta presses Daryl's neck to the blade of a table saw, but he manages to hit him and escape. In response, Beta strikes his own blow, and Daryl stabs him in the chest with a knife, after which he runs into the wall. Beta snatches the knife from his chest and announces that he only wants Lydia. Daryl sneaks up on him from behind from a hidden compartment on the floor and pushes him into the elevator shaft. He spits down and grabs his knife. In the kingdom, the old robbers and the rest return, who assure Ely and Carol that they can be trusted. They greet Tara and ask where Henry and Daryl are, but Tara admits that she thought they were already there. Back in the building, the horse distracts the herd with his slingshot, and Daryl tells the others that they are heading to Alexandria for Henry's help because it is closer. When they leave, at the bottom of the elevator shaft Beta rises in pain and looks up, furious and covered in blood, with his lower front teeth knocked out in the fall. In a flashback to the time of Rick's supposed death, Michonne returns to the riverbank and digs up his weapon, but finds no trace of his body. At least 8 months later, a pregnant Michonne returns and confronts Daryl. He tells her that he went down the river to the ocean, but never found Rick. Michonne asks when he is going to return to Alexandria, to which he replies, "When I find something." In the present, Michonne cleans Rick's gun and puts it in a box labeled Judith. Suddenly, Aaron comes to her house and informs her that Daryl is at the gate with Henry, Lydia and Coney. From the post, Michonne tells Daryl that she is skeptical of Lydia, but he assures her that she is on their side. From another flashback, at a later time in Alexandria, Michonne watches the arrival of strangers and discovers her school friend Jocelyn among them. In the present, Henry is getting stitches on his leg by one of the city doctors. Daryl tells Michonne that they have to go to the kingdom soon. In the past, Jocelyn panics and tells Michonne that she needs to come back. Michonne calms her down and offers to help. Later, Michonne, Gabriel, Rosita and Eugene follow Uni to the factory, where they find several hidden children. In the present, Michonne tells Lydia that she has done things she is not proud of. She suggests that Lydia would make Alexandria a lot safer if she just left. At the lake, Judith tells Daryl that she is glad that he helped Lydia, and says that they could have defeated the Whisperers if they had teamed up, since that's exactly what her father would have done. In Alexandria of the past, Jocelyn's children's group enjoys a bonfire with the youngest Judith and children from the community. At her house, Michonne tells Jocelyn that she is impressed by the children's hunting skills, and Jocelyn replies that children are capable of anything. In the present, Daryl, Henry and Lydia go to the kingdom at night. Michonne and Aaron say goodbye to them, and Judith watches them. After they leave, Michonne looks at the manhole cover, which is closed. In the past, Michonne and some residents go to pick up their children from a sleepover, but discover that Jocelyn and the children have disappeared. Michonne and Scott search Alexandria and find a resident murdered in a storeroom that was raided. Frankie rushes to them and informs them that the infirmary was also raided and all supplies were gone. Michonne finds bloody footprints leading to a trapdoor that is wide open. In the present, Michonne sits down to dinner with her children. Judith refuses to eat and goes to her bedroom. The next morning, Michonne can't find Judith in her room, so she asks Negan if he's seen her and asks what Judith is talking to him about. He replies that it's about homework, about Rick and that she's as cool as Carl. He also says he's being honest with her and maybe if Michonne did the same, she would know where she is. She asks if he told her what he did to Glenn and Abraham, and Negan agrees. He says that Judith hates that she doesn't let Magnus people in and believes that everything should be the way Carl wanted. Michonne shouts that Judith is her daughter, and Negan reminds her that this means she will take matters into her own hands. She rushes home and finds a note from Judith saying that she had to go to help their friends. In the past, Daryl joins Michonne on her mission to find Judith and the missing Alexandrians in the woods. During the break, Michonne laments how stupid it was to trust her old friend, but Daryl reminds her that some people just have too much evil in their hearts. Some time later, Michonne and Daryl spot one of Jocelyn's children near an abandoned school. They chase him until all the children meet them in the hallway. Daryl gets an arrow in the shoulder. Alina is knocked down by Michonne. After a while, they come to their senses bloodied and tied to a pipe. Linus painfully brands Daryl with an iron cross, and Jocelyn tells Michonne that children can't be soft. Vinny then brands Michonne and she screams in pain. When they are alone, Daryl and Michonne break out and separate. Michonne sees Jocelyn in the hallway and demands to know where Judith and the other children are. While they are arguing, Gina points Michonne's katana at her. Jocelyn leaves and orders her and Linus to kill her. Armed only with a pipe, Michonne says she doesn't want to kill them. Linus makes a huge cut on her pregnant belly, and Michonne screams again. She pulls out her katana, and the children run away. Michonne finds a way out, and immediately Jocelyn beats her with a wooden board. Michonne finds the strength to stab her in the leg and chest, killing her. Michonne gets up and tells the kids that they can all go back to Alexandria, but Mitchell orders the kids to kill the Alexandrians while he deals with her. She is forced to kill him as the other children approach her. Michonne begs the children to stop, but they all attack her, and she is forced to kill them one by one until Vinny is left. She runs away when Daryl comes out of school and watches the massacre in confusion. Suddenly Judith appears from the trailer and happily hugs her mom. In the present, Michonne kills several walkers in the woods and finds Judith, saving her from the walker in time. They sit by a log, and Judith tells her that she remembers how the children were kind to her, but Jocelyn was bad. She then tells Michonne that loving someone means protecting them and asks why they stopped loving Daryl, Maggie, Carol, and the king. Michonne replies that this is not the case, and they hug again. In the past, Michonne and Daryl return to Alexandria with their children, and their parents rush to them. Back in the present, Michonne tells Judith how she changed Alexandria's mission to protect her children, but she admits that she was wrong and that they should protect those they love. In the forest, Michonne and Judith drive towards the kingdom and pick up Daryl, Coney, Henry and Lydia along the way. Meanwhile, two Whisperers are watching the caravan arrive in the kingdom. "We have to tell about the Alpha," says one of them smiling. In a flashback, a man and a woman find their way to Hilltop and quickly join society. Years later, they make some crafts and get into a cart to go to a fair in the kingdom. In the forest, they are ambushed and killed by an alpha, who then removes the woman's scalp. In the kingdom, he addresses the crowd and declares that they have finally realized Rick, Carl and Jesus' dream of reuniting communities. While everyone is celebrating, Daryl, Michonne and the convoy are staying. Carol scolds Henry for running away, and Michonne greets Ezekiel, who is shocked to see her. Carol and are surprised at how much Judith has grown, and Tara notices Lydia among them. Inside the theater, Michonne gathers the leaders and tells them that she is finally ready to help Alexandria. Gabriel announces that Alexandria is ready to grant Lydia asylum. They all agree to send some of them to the Hilton to protect them from possible attacks by the Whisperers, and Michonne decides to restore the charter, establishing that an attack on the Hilton is considered an attack on everyone. Then he takes out the original charter. Odora and Michonne finally reconcile. They all sign the charter, and Michonne tells Gabriel that he should sign for Alexandria as the head of the council. At the fair, everyone is happy to sell goods, learn survival lessons, play carnival games and have fun. Michonne informs Sadiq that she is going to go to Hilltop with the first group, and he tells her that he has news that he will tell her when they all return to Hilltop. Daryl, Carol, Michonne, Magna and others leave the kingdom to go to Hilltop and leave some soldiers there in case of a possible attack. In the forest, they meet Ozzy, Alec and DJ and find Hilltop's cart overturned, but without bodies. Carol, Daryl, Michonne and Yumika decide to look for possible traces of survivors while Magna and the others go to Hilltop, and Ozzy and his group patrol the outskirts of the kingdom. At night, Daryl and his groups are attacked by walkers. They destroy them one by one until they are surrounded by Whisperers. Beta appears from behind the trees and tells them to drop their weapons. Memories of what happened earlier that day, Alpha changes into Hilda's clothes and goes to the fair. Meanwhile, Eugene tells Rosita that he has collected radio components to facilitate the communication of communities among themselves. Rosita tells him that, despite her pregnancy, nothing should change between them, and they are still friends. Elsewhere, Henry assures Lydia that he likes her. They kiss, and he leaves to check the pipes, asking her to leave him a place in the cinema. Nearby, Ezekiel meets an alpha in disguise. She introduces herself as Deborah from Alexandria and asks him to show her around. Later in the movie, Lydia worries that Henry hasn't returned yet. Suddenly, Alpha sits down next to her and quietly tells her to be quiet. Later that night, Alpha, now without disguise, approaches Daryl and the group tied to a tree. Wiping the bloody knife on her pants, she tells them that she ran into trouble on the road. Michonne warns her that if she tries to get Lydia back, they will respond with force, but Alpha assures her that Lydia is no longer interested in her. She pulls out a shotgun and tells Daryl to go with her alone. At dawn, Alpha forces Daryl to climb to the top of a cliff overlooking a ravine, where a huge horde of walkers and Whisperers walks under them. Alpha tells Daryl that his community, it's a joke and that her lifestyle is better for her people. She then tells him that his friends in the camp are fine, but the next time his people cross her land, she will unleash a horde on them. She clarifies that she marked the border, and Daryl asks if she killed Lydia. Flashbacks to the previous night, Alpha asks Lydia about being a traitor, but she tells her that this is the best way to live. Then she threatens to scream if she doesn't leave, and Alpha tells her that she was never one of them. Lydia breaks down in tears when Alpha leaves. Returning to the present, Alpha tells Daryl that she did not kill Lydia, and doubts that he will be able to protect her. He tells her she's wrong and leaves. At the Beta camp, he asks about Lydia. I want to be alone, the Alpha orders him, but the Whisperer accidentally witnesses her crying. She stabs him in the neck so that no one knows her weakness. Returning to the kingdom, Daryl, Michonne, Carol and Yumika find Siddiq beaten and bloodied, tied to a tree. He points them to a nearby hill, in the ground of which 10 spades are stuck. A severed head is impaled on the top of each peak. The group goes to him devastated and looks in horror at the victims, Ozzy, Alec, DJ, Frankie, Tammy, Rodney, Eddie, Ennett, Tara and Henry. When Daryl sees Henry's head, he rushes to Carol to prevent her from seeing it, but it's too late. He comforts Carol and tells her to look at him, but she is overwhelmed with emotion. Later, in the kingdom, Siddiq addresses the crowd to break the tragic news. He tells them that the Alpha left him alive so that he would tell the story of the evil that happened and tear the communities apart again. Instead, Siddiq tells a completely different story. Just before the end, the prisoners were found by Ozzy, Alec and DJ, who gave them a chance to fight back. The prisoners fought to the end, protecting each other as a family, although some of them did not even know each other. Although they were defeated in the end, they died heroes, and this is how Siddiq wants them to be remembered and honored. After a while, Daryl and Lydia return to the border. Lydia leaves the necklace that Henry made for her on the ground near the peak that once held his head, and when they leave, it starts snowing. A few months after the Fairground massacre, the kingdom fell into disrepair due to burst pipes, rotting and fires that engulfed many buildings throughout the kingdom. Meanwhile, Carol is sorting through Henry's old things, and Daryl is serving Lydia a plate of dinner. Inside the theater, Illinois looks longingly at the charter of the community, after which he collects his things and leaves. Outside, the remaining members of the kingdom gather and head out into the cold weather to take shelter in the hilltop, leaving the community behind. On the way, Yumika informs Michonne that they have sent letters to Maggie, but have not received a response, and Hilltop is still going through the loss of another leader. Suddenly they notice walkers in the field, and Alden asks Lydia if these are her people. Lydia tells him, "I don't want to cause any more trouble," but Daryl reminds her that people should stop blaming her. Later, when it gets colder, Daryl reminds Carol that Henry wanted Lydia to be with them. She admits that she only sees Henry when he looks at her, and Daryl asks what she sees when she looks at him. She assures him that she sees only him and puts her hand on his shoulder. And Ezekiel notices this and feels uncomfortable. Suddenly, Jerry warns him that they need to find shelter before the storm hits. In Alexandria, Eugene, Gabriel, Rosita discuss that the city will be divided into 3 groups, which will take refuge in Aaron's house, Barbara's house, and the meeting house, since there are the largest fireplaces in the city. At the meeting house, Gabriel and Rosita are warming up. Gabriel comes up with a plan to group around the large fireplaces in the church, and realizes that they will have to release Negan from the cell so that he does not freeze. On the road, Daryl and Carol kill a couple of walkers. Meanwhile, Lydia wanders into the forest and finds a walker stuck in the ice. Crying, she takes off her glove and offers her hand to the walker to commit suicide, but stops when Carol appears and follows her back to the group. When the snow begins to fall, Michonne decides to take the group to an abandoned shelter. Returning to Alexandria, the residents take refuge in the church. Negan jokes about Rosita's love quadrangle and taunts Gabriel, calling him father not father, to Eugene's amusement. Judith tells him that she is worried about the dog she lost, despite the fact that Daryl asked her to look after him. Suddenly, the group smells something, and Eugene pulls Siddiq and Gabriel away from the fireplace before it explodes. He says it's not safe to set fire to anything else because of the chimney, so Gabriel decides they're moving into the Domrona. They all tie a rope around themselves and go into a blizzard. Everyone in the shelter is trying to keep warm. Daryl is sitting with Carol, and she asks him if something happened there between him and Ezekiel. He says no, but Carol has suspicions. She admits that with Henry's departure, it seems to her that she is losing herself again, so Daryl offers to take Lydia and protect her himself, although he does not want to leave. Some time later, the leaders plot their route through a frozen lake on Alpha Land, and Michonne warns that they need to leave, otherwise they won't make it. After that, Ezekiel laments his failures with Michonne, who says that if their communities knew each other better, Alpha would never be able to blend in with them. She swears that she will never let them separate again. The group gathers and leaves the shelter. In the forest, the group passes into the territory of the Whisperers. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Judith hears a dog barking in the distance and, letting go of the rope, runs after him, and Negan rushes after her. Back in the forest, Michonne kills the frozen walkers, not knowing if they are Whisperers or not, before reaching the frozen lake. Daryl notices that Lydia has disappeared again, so Carol goes in search of her and instructs him to transport everyone safely. Suddenly, walkers appear from the snow rubble, and the group kills them one by one before running across the ice. Meanwhile, Carol searches for Lydia at the cabin and asks what she is doing. Lydia explains that she can't cross the river because going to Hilltop won't fix anything, and believes that everyone will blame her for what happened anyway. "Your son is dead because of me," she says, and asks Carol to kill her. Lydia presents the spear to her neck and says that this way she guarantees that they will not lose anyone else. Carol decides to do this, but stops and kills the walker instead. "You're not weak," Carol says before taking her back to the group. Elsewhere, Negan falls under the rubble while searching for Judith. He shouts her name until he hears the dog barking and finds her. Negan puts Judith on his shoulder, takes the dog's leash and gives her his coat to keep her warm. Then he bandages his wounded leg and takes her and the dog away. In the morning, when the storm is over, the group finally stays at Hilltop, where Daryl cuts off the head of a frozen walker. That evening, Daryl informs Lydia that they will leave for Alexandria in the morning. She asks why he left the Hilltop, and he replies that he will tell her the story another time. Meanwhile, Carol tells Azael that she is going to leave him and go to Alexandria with the others. He reminds her that he will always love her, and she says she will never regret this fairy tale. She returns the ring to him, but Ezekiel allows her to keep it for herself. The next morning, Michonne, Daryl and the others return to Alexandria along with Carol and several refugees from the kingdom. Michonne hugs her children and they play snowballs. Later, she goes to the infirmary to visit Negan. She thanks him for saving Judith, and he notices that the last time they were there, Rick had just slit his throat. He praises her for daring to cross the territory of the Whisperers. At their camp, Beta tells Alpha that the time spent away has benefited the pack. Alpha reminds him that she needs to be strong for what comes next, and Beta assures her that it will be. Then she hands him a stick, with which he hits her on the arm. At the Hilltop, Illinois talks to Judith on the radio and says that if they have lost their home, it does not mean that they have lost it forever. They disconnect from the radio, and he leaves. Suddenly another voice is heard asking if anyone is there. "Is there anyone alive there?"